Welcome, everyone, to episode number 1 of the Untangling Election 2021 podcast. As you may have heard, on August 15th, 2021, Canada officially set the date for their 44th election to be September 20th, a mere 30-odd days from today. Thus, over the next 5 weeks, this podcast will be collecting voices and opinions reacting to the ongoings of the 2021 election campaign. As today is our first episode, we're going to be starting off by giving some reactions to why election 2021 was called, as well as some predictions for how each of Canada's 5 major political parties will be doing. Who will win, who will flop, and who will be the biggest surprise? Stay tuned to find out. Before jumping into the election topics and starting to talk amongst each other, we first have to introduce ourselves. So today, my guest here is Kevin. Kevin, say something about yourself. How are you doing today?
Hi, Simon. I'm doing pretty good. Something about myself. I am a 24-year-old recently graduated accountant, and I'm also a former Liberal Party member and supporter. But I will be objective here in what I think about the election. I've always followed politics for a very, very long time, and it's a topic that really interests me.
Yeah, I mean, you're a surprising liberal person, because I remember back during our undergrad years ago, I randomly walked into one of their political meetings. Not that I'm liberal myself, I'll introduce myself in a second. And I was extremely surprised to see Kevin just chilling in the corner. He never left his room before in his life.
That's not true.
So,
I leave my room all the time to go to class.
Yes. Anyways, I'll introduce myself too. My name is Simon. I am also a 23-year-old recent graduate. I have my bachelor's in political science, also in philosophy, and I did my master's in international relations. Currently, I am seeking work, nothing to do with me having a lot of time to record podcasts. But I've always been really interested in elections, especially Canadian elections, because I think they have such interesting minutiae to them, so many interesting side debates, and there's so much more context than like the American or European elections. That being said, I'm a very neutral person myself, as Kevin will attest to. I actually have not voted yet in a Canadian election because I have not been allowed to because I'm a permanent resident. But I will hopefully soon get my Canadian citizenship, so this is kind of a preparation test for me, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So, Kevin, how excited were you for an election in 2021? So, when it hit New Year's in 2020, were you looking forward to election in 2021? Or was that not the intent at all?
Well, I mean, I think you mean New Year's in 2021, right? I think Perhaps. Even before like this, before 2021 even hit, Trudeau said that 2021 would be an election year. So to be honest with you, I always kind of expected him to call an election this year. So the fact that he did isn't really too much of a surprise for me. I always thought that once this COVID shenanigan is over, and with all the goodwill that Trudeau's built up and the Liberal brand has built up, that he's going to try and capitalize on it. Because honestly, with the way the COVID recovery's been going, like we're going to have the financial situation, the way it's going, we're going to have some pretty hard years ahead of us. So he probably wants to capitalize on when his party's near the peak of his popularity. So to me, honestly, It was not a surprise at all.
Yeah, because I have a few friends who are even closer to the Liberal Party than you, Kevin, and they've all been warning me, election 2021, get prepared. So it wasn't a big surprise when it hit, and I was just surprised that it hit so suddenly. I wasn't expecting a 35-day campaign. I thought that was a bit very short.
Yeah, it's the shortest legally mandated campaign season, right? Like, I think they limited it between 36 and 50 days after 2015, when Stephen Harper tried to make it like a super, super long election campaign to try and dig himself out of the polling hole that he was in. But yeah. Mm-hmm. It was quite quick. It wasn't really like the opposing parties banded together and like voted down like some sort of confidence bill of his. Like it wasn't really anything that really prompted it. It just was like Trudeau said, we're going to have an election, folks.
Yeah, and to give some context to some who might not be as familiar about the Canadian political system, our last election was in fall 2019, when the incumbent Liberal Party then, also headed by Justin Trudeau, they were re-elected to a second campaign, but as a minority government. So now, only 2 years later, in Canada we have 4-year terms, Trudeau has asked our Governor General to call another election, a snap election as they would call it. in the hopes, I believe, of securing a majority government, which will make it much easier to do political decisions in the forthcoming few years. But it is kind of risky since he is basically wagering that 2-year period, which he already had confirmed up until today. So how supportive are you, Kevin, of there being an election called? Are you thinking it's just business as normal? Yeah, he can do it. He's a prime minister. Or are you a bit like, for the people during a COVID pandemic, maybe it's not the best idea? What do you think about this?
That's a very interesting question. I'm kind of split on it because COVID has been getting. I mean, for those non-Canadian listeners here, during around April, for the first third of this year, COVID was really, really bad in Canada. Probably the worst it's ever been. But ever since the vaccine rollout has kind of become more of a thing, cases have gone down, and they kind of reached like their lowest point somewhere around July. But now I think cases are slowly kind of coming back up, and I've heard people saying that we're in at the start of like a fourth wave. So what I don't want is for this election to kind of be the super spreader event of this fourth wave, which I don't think it will, because a lot of Canadians are already vaccinated, where the vaccine hesitancy movement over here isn't really as big as, say, in other places such as like the United States. So, but still, even in given that, I do think that the health risks are probably more significant. And I'm not really sure if the vote by mail system we have in Canada is as robust as it was in the US in 2020. So I don't know. What do you think of this, Simon?
It's a very interesting question because, I mean, you mentioned the vote by mail system. Apparently, I think in 2019 we had around 50,000 people vote by mail. Guess how many they're planning for this year?
How many?
5 million is what I heard for
5
estimates.
million? Okay.
Yeah, which is about, I think, a good tenth of our population or so.
More than
If I get
that. I
that
think
correct.
like a sixth. And like
Yeah.
considering the turnout, like assuming we have a turnout of like
Yeah.
65%, like that could be a decent amount. That could be like 20 or 30% of the ballots, all the ballots
Yeah.
cast.
And from what I've also heard, that also means that our results, like America, won't be known day of. Because if you've ever done an
Mm-hmm.
election day in Canada, you typically know by midnight who's won, which is quite
Yep.
exciting. But it
Yep.
could be delayed for a few days here, which I think could be quite scary. But I do kind of feel like our Conservative Party will be a bit more cultured than the Conservatives over in America and not make as big of a deal out of it as Trump did. I'm hoping at least, and I have no
Hoping,
reason to
hopefully.
believe
Hopefully.
otherwise. So I don't think it'll be that big of an issue like the logistics of it. And I don't think the spreading of the disease will be too big of a deal either. I don't think there'll be too many news media who are such pariahs as, oh, this many people got COVID from going to this rally or something. I think the bigger issue is just how it makes Trudeau look, because I think it adds a bit of like irresponsibility to his image, which I think is a key thing that the Conservatives are leeching onto during this campaign. I mean, one of their biggest pushes, as we'll get into future episodes, is they're pushing up like a new ethics bill or something, or a new
Oh,
anti-corruption
yep.
measures.
Yep.
So I just think it doesn't work much to Trudeau's favor. But he
It
did kind of try to justify it. I don't know if you caught the news snippet where he
oh
said, "Yeah, about he said he's giving Canadians the right to choose about the future of their country or something like that," which
well
seems very twisting, kind of what we might want.
Well, it is, but I mean, like, if you think about it, it is true that the post-COVID world that we're hopefully getting into is going to be like a big transition, and Canadians should probably get their voices heard on, for instance, like how long the CERB benefit is going to continue,
Hmm.
or for instance, how much more money we're going to keep spending on all these COVID relief packages, or like how the if we're going to implement some sort of like vaccine passport system or something like that. Those are really, really big issues, and they're issues that are like almost immediate to now, and in a few years they might not be so relevant, but they're extremely high impact and high like and very time sensitive issues. So from that standpoint, I can kind of understand it, but if I'm being honest, I don't think that was the main reason Trudeau wanted to call the election. I think as
Officially,
I
it is, but
yeah, I mean officially it is, but I mean from like a strategic point of view,
mhm.
it's more likely that Trudeau wanted to capitalize on his party's popularity and gamble to win a majority. It is a gamble, I agree, but it's not like some sort of rare occurrence. There's never been a minority parliament in Canadian history that's lasted 4 years. They've always usually lasted around like 1 to 3 years before the governing party or some other party decides to gamble and try and get a majority. Because the way it works in Canada is that a majority government is almost like an elected dictatorship with how I mean it's true, like with how whipped the parliamentarians
Mhm.
are. Canada has by far the most strict whipping system in pretty much I think all democracies. It's not like the US where you frequently see like Democrats vote against Joe Biden's bills or
Mhm.
Democrats going against their own party and stuff. That doesn't happen here. It's so
Yeah.
for parties, for a lot of political parties, they kind of want to solidify their majority so they can get their agenda passed super smoothly.
Yeah, I think I have two other points to add to this. I think it's important to remember that, firstly, I think Trudeau's popularity, especially up until a few weeks ago, was the highest it had been, I think, since 2015 or so. It
Yep.
was, and the Conservative Party was doing, I believe, one of the worst it has been doing in a long while as well.
Yep.
So it makes strategic sense to especially call it right now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and my second point is that pandemic, well, they made a big deal about this being the first pandemic federal election. It hasn't been the first pandemic provincial election in Canada.
Yep.
So I
There's
believe
been
Nova
quite a few.
Scotia just had one.
Yep.
But previously, I believe BC also had one, and the Liberal
Yep.
Party there went from a minority government to majority. And there was
Not the
another
Liberal Party.
instance.
The NDP in BC went from a minority to a
Thank you, Kevin.
majority.
Just
Yep.
just testing your skills here. I have been gone from Canada for a year and a half, so. But and I think there was another occasion also in one of the provinces where they also went from a minority to a
I think
majority.
it might have been Newfoundland that had an election as well.
That sounds correct, and the fact I can't remember it probably means it's correct. So I love my Newfoundland viewers. So, but yeah, one final point I kind of want to ask is: do you think this could backfire at all? Because I was listening to some other people talk about this who are infinitely more smart than I am, and they were talking about how sometimes crisis leaders, which apparently Trudeau now is, there is this rare occurrence which was seen with like people like Winston Churchill, where they were extremely popular, extremely effective leaders, and then they held an election during the peak of the crisis, and people were just
Oh yeah, he
associating
lost.
them.
He lost.
Yeah, and some of the thinking behind that, or psychologically, is they just associate Winston Churchill with World War II. They might
Mm-hmm.
associate Trudeau with COVID, and then they're especially calling the election during a time during when COVID isn't even close to being solved in Canada. They might want to just shift gears, change their vote a little. Do you think that might happen at all here, Kevin?
Well, from the polling, it looks like there has been a bit of a blowback. But I mean, I always say this: the only poll that matters is the one on election day. So we'll see how people actually vote. Do I think it's going to backfire on Trudeau? Well, I mean, you know what? Let's go back to the BC election because I think that
Mm-hmm.
election was actually very interesting and it had a lot of parallels to the federal election. The BC election was held, I believe, in 2020. In 2020, COVID was like even more scary than it is now, right? So people were even more anxious about COVID, and there were probably even more safety issues. But in 2020, the minority NDP government in BC became a majority because I think people wanted the government to have a unified response to COVID, and BC actually did have one of the best responses to COVID in all of Canada, much better than here in Ontario. But that's a topic for another time. So from that sense, I'm getting the sense that it won't because yes, it is kind of a naked power grab. And yes, and yes, people I think right now are angry at it. But I mean, people do have a month for their anger to slow down, to cool down. And at the end of the day, I think people will look at the policies of the parties more than what than why like some party called an election or what sort of motivations there are behind it. Because at the end of the day, people aren't really that tuned into an election and or into politics in general until the last 2 weeks of a campaign, and most people's minds are made up during that last crucial stretch. So for this to backfire on Trudeau, I don't see it. I don't really see it. That's my perspective.
Yeah, and I think that rings especially true that last point you were making to this election, where the election date is September 20th. Nobody's going to really start focusing in, I think, until after Labor Day. And I think
Yep.
most parties are kind of saving their big ammunition until after Labor Day as well. So I
That's a
think
good
those
point.
last 2 weeks will be when we see most of the excitement
Mhm.
start.
Mhm.
So I think and it does honestly feel like there's a lot of a bit trepidation and a bit of a weariness on most of people I've been talking to about heading into another election. But
Mhm.
we'll see. But I think this transitions us really well into, I guess, making our predictions for how each party
Yep.
will be doing. So, for those who didn't know, there's five major political parties in Canada. We'll be going through each one of those, giving a really quick overview of who they are and where we think they'll end up within the next coming months. So, where should we start, Kevin? Any preferences?
Let's start with the Liberals. They are the governing party, after all, and they're the party that started this whole circus. So let's start with the Liberals.
Very true, very true. So, how do you think the Liberals have been doing? So the Liberals are more of the center left leaning party within Canada, with Justin Trudeau as their empathetic leader.
The Liberals have always historically been the big tent party, and they've always been the natural governing party of Canada. That's what they call themselves, and
It's a
honestly, it
big
is kind of
statement there.
true.
It's a big statement there.
I mean, that is what they call themselves. It's not like a big statement, but they have historically been by far the most successful Canadian political party. Like I think in like 150 years since Confederation, they've governed for like 90 or 100 of those. So like they've been the default choice in Canada for a long time. As to how I think they'll do this election, this will probably be the most important question of the election. Right now, I'm going to say that they'll win a very narrow majority, like maybe like 5 to 10 seats of breathing room
I
in a
would join you
majority.
in that prediction. I just think that the public sentiment behind Trudeau has been very strong for the past few months.
Yep.
While the Conservatives are making a big deal about his incompetence and the scandals he's had, as long as there's not any new scandals, I think, that are unearthed during the next few weeks, I don't think it's going to dog him down that much. And as long as he can just show, I have a plan to go forward, to move forward with this election, make real change now, as his slogan is, I think they'll be pretty healthy. And their polling numbers are not bad if you look at it. I have the most recent numbers from the CBC election tracker poll here in Canada,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a 41% chance they're predicting for a majority government, but still
Really,
very high.
that's like pretty high. And
Yeah,
that's
but
right
then
right at the start of the campaign too.
yeah, but I mean, we're both predicting they'll get it, so we're in the
Yeah,
minority, I
that's
guess,
true. That's
statistically.
true.
And they have a 48% chance of winning a minority.
Okay, so
So
then that means they
basically,
pretty much have like a 90% chance of winning the most seats in general.
yeah, which
Mm-hmm.
statistically, it will be quite embarrassing if they manage to screw this up in any way whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if there's nothing else, I think the modern Liberal Party is pretty good at running a campaign. So
The Liberals have always been very good at running elections.
yeah,
They have like a culture of winning. Like the saying here in Canada goes, the Conservatives stand for big business, the NDP stands for labor rights, and the Liberals stand for re-election. And that's pretty
mm,
true. So the Liberals, they always have a machine. Like I think the Liberals have by far the most cohesive coalition of voters from among the five main parties. And they're the only party that, in my opinion, has like pretty distributed strength across all of Canada, with the exception of Alberta and Saskatchewan, where they're pretty much non-existent. But those two provinces don't have too many seats, anyways. And like the Liberals in BC, in Ontario, in Quebec, in the Maritimes, they can win a lot of seats. They can win consistent amounts of seats in each of those places, and that can easily propel them to a majority. They don't even need Alberta or Saskatchewan in order to do so.
mhm.
They have a lot of paths to victory, which gives their campaign a lot of tactical flexibility in where they want to target.
Yeah, and I think just make one last point before we move on to the Conservatives. I think Quebec will be very, I think, key here because I don't
Yes.
think any other party. I believe Liberals and Bloc Québécois are kind of tied neck and neck for amount of seats they'll get out of Quebec, but no other party comes even close. And any party who's done very well in Canada traditionally has to have a plentitude of Quebec seats, just to kind of ease out those ranks. Because if we remember, back in 2011 with the Orange Wave, most of the seats they won came from Quebec as well. So it just shows that if there's going to be an upset, it requires Quebec, and Quebec seems pretty solidly traditionally liberal or Bloc
Yep.
Québécois.
Yep.
So, what about our conservative friends? According to that same CBC election poll, they have an 11% chance of winning more seats than the Liberals. How happy would you be?
It would be a surprise, but I mean, surprises happen in politics sometimes. Like, I wouldn't count the conservatives out, to be completely honest with you. But
Mhm.
the issue I'm seeing here is that the Conservative Party of today is not like the Conservative Party of the 2000s, where for those listeners not familiar with Canadian politics, in the 2000s, the Conservative Party won a bunch of minority parliaments. They won a bunch of elections, but they only got minority seats in each parliament, and they had to rely on working with other parties in order to pass their agenda or even to govern in general. But and the conservatives back then were able to do this because they were seemed to be a lot more centrist than the conservatives of today. But if I'm being honest, even if the conservatives win the most seats in an election in this year's election, I don't see how they form government. There's almost no way they're going to win a majority of the seats. The only way they can form government is, in my opinion, is if they win a majority of the seats. And if they win a minority of the seats, I don't think the NDP is going to work with them. I don't think the Bloc's going to work with them. And I don't think the Liberals, no way are they going to
Yeah.
work with the Conservatives, obviously. So if that's the case, I'm really struggling to see how the Conservatives can actually form government, even with winning the most seats. And it's quite unlikely they'll win the most seats. There's a couple of issues with the Conservative coalition. It seems like they have like two different wings of the party that kind of want to go in separate directions,
Mhm.
but they're still kind of stuck together in this unholy monster of conservatism. The one faction is like the populist conservative faction that's mostly based in Western Canada, and they kind of want to move the party into like a more socially conservative, more populist direction. While the more moderate red Tories, more based out east, probably want the party to become more centrist. And I think Aaron O'Toole is a part of
He
the
is a
red
red Tory.
Tory faction. Yeah, he's more
And
of a centrist, right?
and a lot of the messaging they've been releasing throughout the past few days do show that they're promoting a red Tory agenda. I just wonder how that's going to fly over with their other half in
Yeah,
Alberta.
with the populists in Alberta.
Hmm.
I'm not sure. Part of me thinks that honestly, like if you look at the last elections results, the
Hmm.
Conservatives in Alberta won those Alberta ridings, and I mean not just Alberta, like in the West, they won those Western ridings with like North Korea margins. It was ridiculous. Like most of the ridings had like 70% of the votes go Conservative, so they have a lot of room to lose votes in the West. If they are really going to push for a more red Tory agenda, I could see them picking up seats in Ontario. I could see them picking up seats in the Maritimes. Quebec, less likely. I don't think they're going to pick up a lot of seats in Quebec. But it's going to be interesting because they need to quieten down their socially conservative base because that's what's losing them votes at the end of the day. It's the
Hmm.
social conservatives. And if they can do that, they might be in with a shout. They might surprise people, especially if they can regain the immigrant communities that they gained in 2011, which got them a majority. If they can regain the immigrant communities in or around the outer GTA, they could be a threat. This
Yeah,
election may be too soon though.
I tend to agree. I think if the Conservative Party survives this election with the, let's say, just a minimal amount of gain of seats, let's say 10 to 20 seats gained, that should be a success, in my opinion, for them. Just considering how well the Liberals are polling and also kind of the current state of lack of identity for the party itself. Where some might say, yeah, of course, they have a red Tory front, they still have that back end you were speaking about, which
They have a
I
red
don't know how
Tory
big of a
front,
back.
but the problem is their social conservative base is very very loud and very very
Mhm.
they push away a lot of other voters, I think,
Yeah,
simply.
and I think just all the issues which Aaron O'Toole will be plagued with throughout the campaign, such as the vaccine stuff, he can't really make a definitive statement on for
Oh
fear of
yeah,
uttering that
he
segment. Because the
said
biggest news story has been his refusal to really 100% commit to getting, I think, federal employees vaccinated,
yep.
which I feel like if he only had the red Tories to worry about, that wouldn't have been. He would have just said, "Yes, I'm going to do it." But given the more hesitancy within the social conservative front, he can't really commit. But I think we're getting a bit too much into the nitty
Yep.
gritty here. I
Yep.
think we're both kind of in agreement. They're probably not going to sneak away with a win, but we could see them making a few nice little gains and really solidifying up their reputation if they stay cohesive.
Oh, but I guess one more thing, but they could also catastrophically lose a lot of seats. Like, if their polling goes lower than this, like, I could see them getting like 70 seats or like even lower, which would be a disastrous result for them.
I think the most disastrous result for the country would be if they lose almost all their seats except for Alberta and the prairies. Because I think that would really... I don't know if people remember from the 2019 election, the Conservatives won almost all the seats within the prairie provinces, so that's typically Saskatchewan and Alberta. And there was a big dialogue after the 2019 election where everybody was like, "Oh, Alberta wants to go out. We're no longer in alignment with Canadian ideas and stuff," which thankfully died down a little. But I would hate to see that debate reemerge, and I just think for the country, it's better to stay a bit more cohesive. Avoid embarrassment of our southern neighbors, I mean, talking about embarrassments, should we talk about the Green Party?
Oh man, I don't know where to start with this. That was a very good transition. I'll say that.
I think I'm going to dedicate a specific episode to just talking about the state of the Green Party because it's quite fascinating what happened. But do you think you could give a really quick 1-minute synopsis of how it's broken down?
All right, so pretty much the previous Green Party leader, Elizabeth May, did a very, very good job with the party. In the 2019 election, they won 3 seats and over 1 million votes, which for the Green Party is their best result ever by far. But Elizabeth May since then retired, and the new leader, Annamie Paul, has been polarizing to say the least. She's been involved with numerous scandals. I think the latest one was caused one of her sitting MPs of the Green Party in Fredericton to cross the floor and join the Liberals. I think it was because it was something to do with the Israel-Palestine conflict, right? The MP in question, Janika Atwin of Fredericton, was criticizing like Israel's conduct towards the Palestinians. And I mean, Annamie Paul, I believe, is Jewish.
Yes, she is Jewish.
And I guess she kind of took offense to this, and there was like a huge controversy within the party, a lot of infighting.
And that still continues till today. I think they're refusing to fund her campaign, which is quite funny.
Oh yeah. I think that was the straw that broke the camel's back, because there was a lot of tensions between the Green Party structure and the leader, which makes me question why they chose her in the first place.
It's just at the current time, she is only running her campaign in her riding in Toronto.
Yep.
Which is very telling. And the fact is, her riding in Toronto, I think Toronto Central or whatever, it's typically been a very strong Liberal stronghold. So the chances of her even winning that seat are still dubious.
Well, I mean, in Annamie Paul's defense, like she did run in a by-election in that same riding, and she did okay. Like obviously she didn't win, but she did get like something like 37 or 8% of the votes. So
she did, but she still didn't win.
Yeah,
and she was still running against a Liberal candidate who I assume would share many of her similar values. But I don't know. I think the Green Party is exciting. I just wish they should have just been better prepared for this election and been more cohesive as a front. I really don't see them winning more than 1 seat.
I agree with that. And that 1 seat will be Elizabeth May's seat in Sonic Gulf Islands out in British Columbia.
Yeah,
I think,
which is sad.
It's very unfortunate because in 2019, like it seemed like the Green Party was like on the up. They had a base. They newly made a base in the Maritimes of all places, which I did not expect. And they were doing well in some Ontario ridings as well. And obviously out west in BC, the BC was like their stronghold. They get a lot of votes in BC. So it seemed like the Green Party could have maybe even like potentially replaced the NDP down the line as the third left-wing party. But now I think they've kind of burned all their goodwill. I honestly don't see them winning more than 1 seat, and probably not even more than like 800,000 votes. Which is unfortunate because I think we really need an environmentalist voice.
I mean, I think the NDP and the Liberal policies are pretty much exactly the same as the Green.
I think they would disagree with you on that.
Perhaps. Maybe I'm overgeneralizing a bit, but that's how I personally see it. But regardless, speaking of the NDPs, we should move on to them real quick. So the New Democratic Party in Canada, best known by their vibrant color choice of orange to lead themselves. I definitely approve of that. They're led by their passionate leader, Jagmeet Singh, who I think also is expecting child now, or his wife is. So
Oh yeah,
congratulations to him.
yeah. His wife is expecting. Congrats to him. The NDP are for further context, they're the main left-wing party in Canada. People always associate the Liberals with the left, and they are, to be fair, the Liberals are more left-wing than they are right, but the Liberals are essentially, I think, a centrist party historically.
I would disagree. In modern times, they are much better characterized as left. But I mean, on political scales, they're more left. They are distinctly
They're more
left to the
left than they are
center.
right, I'll say that.
Yeah.
But the NDP is like a social democratic party. Like historically their foundation was actually like a socialist organization in the 30s, the Cooperative Commonwealth Foundation, and they kind of transitioned over into being a more run-of-the-mill social democratic party. As to how I'm going to think the problem with the NDP, in my opinion, is that they always poll really well at the start of an election, and then they kind of fall off towards the end as people tend to strategically vote more. People tend to want the Conservatives out more than they want the NDP in, and that really makes their vote very inefficient. And
But this election, the Conservatives aren't going to be in, according to polls. So there's more chance for people actually to vote how they want to vote, right?
that's true, and that could pose a danger to the Liberals.
And Jagmeet Singh, who is their leader, is I think polling the highest out of any leaders in terms of personability and favorability, and he does seem like the coolest guy in the room when he's in the room.
He does seem like the coolest guy in the room, but is he ready to be a prime minister? His party's never held power ever in Canada, and
That's true.
I don't know. I think what's holding the NDP back is not the leader. I think the leader is actually fine. I think it's the policies that are actually holding the NDP party back. Like I read like some of their new well, I didn't read actually. One of my friends sent me like some of their new policies today. Like they wanted to raise the capital gains tax inclusion rate to 75%, and like they wanted to do a lot of other stuff that would increase housing. And yes, that would be really good for the working class in Canada, but the votes are mostly from the middle class, and the middle class don't really like those policies. So I don't really see how. I actually think they might do worse than they did last election, if I'm being honest with you. Last election, they got like around like 20 something seats, 28, 29. I could see them dipping a bit lower than that, because I think the Liberals might steal their thunder with like a lot of the policies they're putting out. And right now it seems like the NDP's policies are kind of out of left field and not really applicable, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would actually disagree with you there. I know in 2019 they actually massively underperformed. Well, they performed much worse than they were expecting to perform during that election. They were hoping to get a few more seats out of there, but the Liberals the Conservative thing ate up a bit of those, which they were hoping to gain. And I think this election, I think the big deciding factor is simply going to be that people aren't as scared about strategically voting anymore. I remember 2015, everybody just wanted to vote Liberal to get the Conservatives out of power. And in 2019, some of that fear still persisted with some people strategic. Nobody really seriously considered, I believe, the NDP under Jagmeet Singh as like a solid choice for your vote, to get your money's worth out of your vote. I think times might be changing now, especially more metropolitan areas. And I think especially seeing Jagmeet Singh focus on BC or British Columbia as his area or his base of operations, as he's, I think, started campaigning there already. I think that's a really good battleground for him to take some of those seats, maybe poach some of those leftover Green Party seats and grab a few of those Liberal ones and really form a bit of a foundation there. I don't see them at all finishing with even close to minority level. That would be insane to even think about. But I think they could gain maybe a good number 5-10 seats and just maybe be a bit more, especially if the Liberals don't win a majority, they might be a bit more of a coalition partner, and I would hope to see that happen.
I think that would be the best outcome for the country, because the NDP tends to push the Liberals in a more left-wing direction and forces the Liberals to pursue a
best
bit
outcome
more.
If you're liberally oriented.
That's true. That's true. But the most transformative Liberal policies have come under minority governments where they've worked with the NDP.
Yeah, fair enough. And I mean, lastly, we'll talk about some transformative party, the Bloc Québécois, hoping to transform Canada into not Canada anymore, or officially not anymore. I guess they've lost their mandate of separatism, which is sad. I love that flair. But
yeah, they're more, I feel like these days, like historically, for those listeners who aren't really familiar with it, the Bloc Québécois where it was born as like a separatist movement in Quebec. They only run candidates in Quebec, hence the name Bloc Québécois. And pretty much in the 90s, their explicit goal was to see Quebec become independent of Canada. Nowadays, I don't think that's really. I mean, I think officially
they removed it from their platform. I believe.
Yeah, they removed it from the
election
platform
or two ago.
Yeah, so like even officially, it's not their goal anymore.
No.
Yeah, nowadays I think they're an option for Quebecers who just are fed up with the federal government and want. It's like a protest vote party. I actually see them doing worse this time around too, because in 2019 they actually won a lot of votes and a lot of seats, way more than I was expecting. They won like 30-something seats, right? If I recall correctly.
They have a decent stronghold. I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head. But I think this time around, I think it'll stay about the same. I really like Yves Blanchet, their leader. I think he's a really fun guy.
He has a great dress sense, I'll say that.
He's very sharp looking. If I looked half as good as he does at his age, I would be thanking the God every day. Mm-hmm. But anyway, I think Bloc Québécois, they're going to be Quebec centric party anyways. I think they'll just perform normally. No insane predictions there, right?
Really? I think they might do a bit worse too, if I'm being honest with you.
Fair enough. I guess
because,
agree to disagree.
Well, I mean, I'll give my reasoning. I think it's because, as I said, the Bloc Québécois these days seem just like a Quebec protest party, right? But these days, it doesn't seem like Quebec has a lot to protest about. I think the liberal brand in Quebec is quite strong, and during the COVID pandemic, the Liberals have been perceived to have done well. So there's not as much for Quebecers to be mad about with respect to the federal government. So because of that, it's not due to anything the Bloc Québécois is doing themselves. I just think that because of the federal government's performance in this pandemic, they might siphon off some support that way.
Fair enough. I could see that working for a few people. Personally, I feel like most of the other parties, like I think the Conservatives will push most of the rhetoric of Trudeau's shortcomings, and I think that will transform. That will also be present within Quebec. But I think instead of voting Conservative there, they'll vote to the Bloc Québécois. So I think they'll kind of free ride off whatever rhetoric the other parties are pushing.
Maybe,
but I don't know. It's hard to judge by Bloc Québécois in the first place because we are two English-speaking Ontarians. So they are much more of a niche party they don't even run candidates in other provinces. So they're just assumed to exist. And
I always said I would vote for the Bloc if I could.
I really wanted to, but I would love to. Okay, so I think we're nearing the end of our allotted time for today. I want to finish with a fun question. So we talked a bit about the leaders and everything, right? A bit about the parties, the predictions. So, Kevin, tell me, if you're running as, let's say someday in your grand political voyage, you just get thrust the front and center debate, you are the political leader, what one thing do you sneak into the platform that you want to get accomplished?
And
I'm saying this is something small, like a little footnote, like if you were in power, what thing would you sneak in there?
Oh wow, you're actually stumped me. I'm not quite sure. Maybe I
could share mine if you want.
Yeah, sure.
Because I've had the blessing of foresight, having known this question for 20 minutes before we started recording, which is when I thought of it. But I was thinking maybe slip in a little Olympic Games promise or something like that. I think a massive sporting event which went over really well in Tokyo, but
really well in Tokyo.
I just like the idea of having some big national event that people can look forward to, like slipping some promise of like, ooh, host the FIFA World Cup, host this. I know it's not a great site, but I'd slip it in, footnote it.
For me, maybe I don't know, like be more proactive in pushing Canada's sovereignty over the Arctic. There's a lot of natural resources there. And with global warming the way it is, those natural resources are gonna be ripe for exploitation soon. We could do a bit of Canadian imperialism. Canada's never really gotten into the imperialist game. Why should we miss out? The last bit of unclaimed real estate on Earth is right there for the taking, right next to us. Maybe we could do something about that.
But no, I think I would love to see like some like Igloo Advanced Forces or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. That would be pretty cool too.
Wow. Regardless, I've really enjoyed having you on today, Kevin. I'm sure we'll do another episode or two of you as a guest, and we'll for
Yep.
sure revisit these predictions when it all ends to see how
Yep.
horribly right or wrong we were. I'm leaning towards the latter, but we'll see how it goes.
All right. Yeah, it
As
was fun.
As for this podcast, I'll just really do my little announcement section about what's coming forward. I'm hoping to do these podcasts bi-weekly. So if you're at all interested in coming on, speaking, sharing your thoughts like Kevin so graciously did with his time, feel free to just reach out to me. I'd love to have anybody on, pair up some people, pair up some friends, have a lively discussion. So I'm hoping to get another episode out this weekend and another one next week. So every few days you should have a new episode to listen to. Embrace while the elections is going on around you. So yeah, if you could like, subscribe, share, comment, that would be amazing. I would really appreciate it. So yeah, I think that's going to be all from us today. Thanks for listening and hope to catch you next day. Bye, everyone.
Bye.